Okay, so today we'll be going over Linux operating system configuration. First, we'll start off with like updates, and then I'll go over some more update configuration, and then we'll go over the firewall, and at the end, some more miscellaneous configs. So the first thing, like I said, I want to go over our updates. So updates are a very reliable way to get points during the competition because what will tend to be the case is there will be a lot of packages on the system that are outdated or like a low version, and updating them will just give you points. And it also updates your kernel. So yeah, it's a very reliable way to get points. So the four main commands that you should try to remember are the update, upgrade, auto remove, and auto clean. And you run them in that order. So the first command, apt-get update. Oh, and for all these commands, you can also just use apt instead of apt-get. There's really no difference between them. It's just preference. So the update command, what it'll do is it'll update your list of repositories that you're downloading packages from. And what a repository is, well, I kind of already explained it, but it's a location where you download packages from. So depending on your operating system, there will be some pre-configured repositories that you download packages from. And this apt-get update command just updates whatever link it's pointing to. Upgrade will actually do all the downloading of the packages. So this upgrade command will take the longest. And the reason I'm going over updates first is because it takes some time. It takes more time to do than almost any other vulnerability in the competition. So um, it could be considered a wise idea to do updates first so that you have time during the later ends of the competition and you're not rushing to finish updates, which you really don't have much control over. And then auto remove and auto clean are if any dependencies are removed or something, or sorry, if any packages are no longer needed, then auto remove and auto clean will delete the dependencies. Um, and then you can optionally restart the operating system. Sometimes what will happen is packages aren't fully deleted until you restart, so you can also get points from restarting. However, you want to make sure that you're not doing other things in the middle of the updates, which could be interrupted by a restart. So take that with your own discretion. So I mentioned repositories and downloading packages, and the primary location where you can configure what repositories you download packages from is sources.list. So as you can see in the title, the location of this file, it's a text file, is /etc/apt/sources.list. And so this file determines basically where every package you download comes from. Uh, the sources.list file is unique to different operating systems. I'll go over that in a bit. And also you should make sure to secure the sources.list file before you perform updates, because when you update your package manager, which in this case is apt, when you update, apt will look through the sources.list file and find where you want to download your packages from. So you'll need to configure this file correctly before you update your packages in order to successfully update them. And so in terms of the format for sources.list, uh, I'm going to change my screen to start sharing my VM. Okay, so hopefully you guys can see that. Oh. Okay, so I have the sources.list file open here. I'm just going to zoom in a bit. Okay, so right now I believe I'm on, let me check. Yeah, I'm on, this VM is running Ubuntu 16.04. So like I mentioned earlier, every operating system will have a different sources.list file. And the format of the sources.list file is each repository will be listed on a separate line. This first field, which says deb, um, that will be the package format. So it can either be deb or deb-src. So it'll look like this, in which case it means the file that it's downloading from will be an actual source code file, as opposed to deb, which is a .deb file, which your package manager can download from. And then the second field is the URL of the actual repository. That's kind of self-explanatory. The third field is what's called the OS code name. So every version of Ubuntu or Debian or whatever distribution you're using, every version will have a different what's called a code name, uh, what Linux refers to as like it's just a unique name for every version. So for example, Ubuntu 60.04 is referred to as Xenial, and then Ubuntu 18.04 is referred to as Bionic. So this third field here is will generally just contain the code name for the operating system, which is also why it is important that you know what operating system or what version you are using before you configure the sources.list file, because this field right here is unique to whatever version you're on. And then the last field, it can be separated by spaces and it can be several words. This just refers to the section of the repository that you're downloading from. Um, so these sections, you don't really have to worry that much about them, but they're they're just divisions of the repository and they're named different things. So for example, on this first line, we're downloading from the main and the restricted sections. In this line, we're downloading from the universe section, so that's all you really need to know about it. I just wanted to go over the format of the sources.list file so you have a better understanding of it, but really you don't need to know exactly what this file does for the competition. All you need to know is how to configure it properly, and I'll go back to my slides. Yeah, so like I said, all you need to know really for the competition is how to configure it securely. And the way you do that is very simple. Generally the default config for the default sources.list file for whatever version you're on will be the most secure version. So in order to get this file is you just download a VM or you make a VM of whatever version you'll use during the competition, which is probably 16.04. And then you'll look at the Etsy app sources.list file and you'll just copy that entire config into somewhere accessible for your team during the competition. Another way you can do it is you could probably just look up a GitHub repository, and there's lots of GitHub repositories that have the sources.list file for specific versions. But you can also just make a vanilla virtual machine and not tamper with it at all, and then use that sources.list file. Okay, and the next thing I'll go over is how to configure automatic updates. So automatic updates are another way to get points during the competition. Uh, this is another self-explanatory concept. It's just how often you want to check for updates. And the way to minimize from all this, the way to configure automatic updates is you'll go to your settings and updates, or yeah, software and updates, which you can find just from searching using the little control panel here. Software and updates. This place can also be accessed from your settings. However, it's kind of tedious to go from here. So you can see settings, software and updates is right down here. And what you do from here is you'll go to updates and then you want to configure everything on this page as follows. So you want to install updates from all these sources, check for updates daily, download security updates and install them automatically, and all this stuff. So basically everything on this page you want to have configured the same way as it is default. And what that'll do is just it'll make your computer check for updates daily and do all this other stuff, which is the most secure way to configure updates. Okay, I'll go back to my slides. I hope there isn't much delay between when I switch what screens I'm sharing. Okay. Um, Okay, the next thing we'll go over is firewall, and an important concept to know about before you start configuring with the firewall are ports. So ports in terms of networking are a communication endpoint, but within the operating system, they are used to identify a service or process. So most, if not all, services in Linux will, or also Windows will be, they can be identified by their port. for example, FTP is port 21 by default, SSH is port 22, HTTP is port 80, HTTPS is port 443. And during the competition, you'll be asked to configure specific services, the most common of which is probably SSH. So it's important to know what port your service is on, so that you'll know how to configure the firewall for the service. Um, so yeah, you don't really have to memorize these because they're very quick to just Google them, but some of them you should know off the top of your head, like SSH and FTP and HTTPS and HTTP. And so how do you use the ports in the context of a firewall? Well, what is a firewall? A firewall is just a network system that filters and controls traffic that's being sent to and from it. Another way to describe this is inbound and outbound connections. Inbound refers to connections that your network is receiving, and outbound refers to connections that your network is sending. There are two main ways to configure the firewall. I'll go over the first way, which is through the UFW, which is short for uncomplicated firewall. Um, and as the name suggests, it is a very uncomplicated method of configuring the firewall. So these are all of the main commands that you should know. You can also find out all the commands just by typing UFW into your terminal, and it'll show you all the possible commands, but these are the most relevant ones. So how the firewall works is you'll add rules to the firewall, such as block or accept inbound uh, all inbound connections to port 22. So that's an example of a rule that you might add to your firewall. And what rules are, they just specify whether or not you should accept or drop a packet. Um, and a packet just refers to like a collection of data that is traveling through your network. So so you'll add rules to your firewall in order to secure it. You'll add rules to allow certain services to come through given their ports. And then you'll also add default policy rules, meaning if this packet doesn't comply with any of the other rules you'll set, then what is the default behavior that it should undergo? So I'll go over the first few commands. So there's UFW status, which just shows you all of the current rules that you've configured. There's UFW enable, which actually enables the firewall. You um, you don't want to forget to enable the firewall after you set up all your rules. Otherwise, it's just useless. And then there's UFW. I think I wrote this command wrong. I think it's dash dash force reset. Um, yeah, yeah, my bad. It's dash dash force reset. I should have the chat open. Oh, what's the point of the fourth field? That was a while ago. Wait. Um, should I go back to that question? Wait, Josh, what were you referring to sources.list? Josh, Deb, are you talking about in the sources.list file?
Okay, typing is going slow, so I'll just talk.
Yeah,
Um,
that's cool.
I was asking, like, you put in the URL to specify, like, where the package or where the repository was coming from.
Yeah.
But I was wondering, like, why would you said that the fourth field is where you specify the section that you're downloading from? And I'm
Mm-hmm.
asking, why do you need the fourth field? Like, shouldn't the URL be specific enough?
Um, that is a good idea, but I guess the answer is it just isn't specific enough. So the URL just refers to the entire repository. I agree. That would probably be more intuitive if they just got rid of the section format. Oh, but another reason for that might be because there are several sections that you're downloading from, and you don't want to just like write multiple URLs. That's kind of long. So that might be the reason why. But yeah, that's just the way it is. Like I said earlier, though, you don't really need to concern yourself too much with the format of this file. Just know what you need to do to configure it, which is just change all the lines to the default configuration, if that answers your question.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that answers it.
Okay, cool. Okay, I'll go back to the firewall. Okay, I'm not getting like any sound notification for these questions, so I'll just leave it open on my screen. Okay, where was I? Yeah, so this command is supposed to be dash dash force reset. and it just resets all of the rules that you have in the firewall. I believe it also disables the firewall because that's the default behavior of it, of UFW. So you'll need to reset all the rules and then enable it in case you haven't. Um, and the reason why you might want to use this reset command is because sometimes Cyber Patriot will be kind of tricky and they might add like a rule to block a packet or a port that you need. So it's just safe to just reset all the rules and start from scratch, and it really doesn't take too long either. Um, Another option, you can just check the status of the UFW and you'll see all the pre-configured rules. And in that scenario, if there are no bad ones, then you don't need to reset it. But I mean, it's just a simple strategy to configure the firewall, resetting it. And then so these commands are where you add rules. So allow, there's also deny, but you rarely use the deny command. So UFW allow, and then the port. So the port refers to the number that the service is on. So if I go back to this table here, um, FTP is on port 21. So that would be the number that you specify if you're trying to allow connections to port 21 or to FTP. And this out here, which I have in square brackets, just represents that it's optional. If you omit the out, then the default behavior is that it allows inbound connections. Um, and you rarely will use allow out. It's just an option. And the reason for that is because most of the time or I'll go over in a second actually. So the next command is UFW delete and then a number. So when you list the status of all your rules, they'll be listed in chronological order from when you add them. And you can delete like the first one you made with UFW delete 1 or something. Uh, so that's pretty self-explanatory. And then these last two commands specify the default policy of the uncomplicated firewall. Um, the two commands that you'll be using are UFW default deny incoming and UFW default allow outgoing. And this is what you should actually use during the competition. And what it does is it makes the default behavior of all packets um, to be blocked if they're incoming. So any packet that's being sent to your computer, you just block it immediately. And the default behavior for outgoing packets is to allow them. So making connections to other sites, the default behavior for that should be to allow it. And the reason for this is because unless you are running a server of some kind, you do not need to have incoming connections. And what I mean by a server is going back to this previous slide, one example of a server that you might need to configure, and Cyber Patriot has you configure often, is an SSH server. So you'll need other people to be able to connect to your computer using SSH. In that scenario, you would use UFW allow and then port 22 to allow inbound connections to SSH because you want people to be able to connect to your network through port 22, which is SSH. And the reason why I mentioned earlier that you will rarely use UFW allow out is because the default policy for outgoing connections is to allow them anyway. So you don't need to put another rule on top of that to allow connections. What you might do is UFW deny out, but that is also very rarely used because rarely will an outgoing packet be harmful. Um, yes, I think I went over that. Any questions about the firewall? Also another thing I mentioned earlier is how the firewall works. So you add rules, and each subsequent rule will be lower and lower down the chain, and then at the very bottom will be whatever your default policy is. So it doesn't matter what order you run these commands, but how it will work anyway is the rules that you add will be at the top, and then the policy will be at the bottom. That's just the way that I visualize it. And then when a packet comes through your network, it will go through each subsequent rule, and if it isn't blocked or if it isn't accepted or denied by any specific policy, then it will just go to the default policy, which is allowing outgoing connections and denying incoming connections. And that's how the firewall works. And then another way to configure firewall is through IP tables. IP tables are a somewhat more convoluted way to configure the firewall because what the UFW will do, UFW actually uses IP tables for a lot of their rules. Um, and the reason for that is because the IP tables gives you a very blank slate to work on. And you need to be very, very specific in your commands in order for it to do exactly what you want. With UFW, using one command like allowing a port or something of that nature, one rule will generally have several rules underneath it that UFW is adding in order to make it more secure and to have it do what you intend it to do. But IP tables isn't so easy. It relies on you and you alone to like exactly configure how you want the firewall to be. And how might you do that? You might ask. So these first commands that you might just want to run at the beginning in case there are any bad rules, the same way you would run UFW dash dash force reset, uh, this command, the same way you might run that. These two commands are essentially the equivalent. So what flush does, it clears all the chains, and then dash x deletes all the chains that are non-default. And what are chains? Chains are chains are either input or output or forwarding. Those are the three default chains that IP tables has support for. You can create chains and stuff, but you don't have to get into that. So as I said earlier, chains are input, output, and drop, and that's what I'll refer to them going forward. So input, output, and drop. It refers to inbound, or no, wait, what am I saying? Input, output, and forwarding. And you don't really need to worry about forwarding for the scope of this competition. So really just worry about input and output as your two primary chains. So what flush does, it removes all the rules from your chains. So if you have any input rules, if you have any output rules, all those will be deleted. Dash X deletes all non-default chains. So if you have a chain that isn't input, output, or forwarding, then it'll just be deleted by the dash X command. Once again, the reason for these commands is so that you don't get tricked up by Cyberpatriot if they add their own specific rules that are messing with you. Okay, I'm gonna go a bit quicker now because we have 15 minutes left. Okay, so the general usage of IP tables is you use the dash capital A, which means append. So you'll append a rule to your list of rules, and then you'll specify what chain it's on. So it's either input or output. Then you'll specify the protocol. It'll generally just be TCP, but some ports are on different protocols. But generally it's TCP. And then the dash dash D port is the actual number of the port. So what you would put in this D port argument for SSH is D port 22. And for FTP, it would be dash dash D port 21. And also for both of those services, the protocol is TCP for those, just in case you're wondering. So, and then finally you add the dash J, which specifies what you want to do with the packet once you receive it, and it can either be accept or drop. So yeah, that's how IP tables works. In order to configure the default policy, how you would do it on UFW is UFW default deny incoming. How you do it on IP tables is use the dash capital P and then what chain it's on, and then the default behavior, which is drop for input and then accept for output. And then to list all of your rules, you can use IP tables dash capital L, and then these other arguments or these other flags are just to make the output a little more pleasing. And then in order to save the rules, because the thing about IP tables is after you restart your operating system, these rules won't persist. They'll just like wipe as soon as you restart. So one option that you can do is you can modify some of the files that run when the OS starts, but there's really no need for that. So the easier way to do it is just install this package, which is called iptables-persistent, and then run the netfilter-persistent save command. And that's in order to keep the IP table rules, keep them up after you restart your computer. Next, we'll go over the sudoers file. Rafu touched a bit on the sudoers file during A block, but if you weren't there, the sudoers file is a file in the etc directory that determines which users or which groups can use the sudo command. So if you don't know what the sudo command is, it's short for superuser do. So, and if you don't know what the superuser is, the superuser, also known as root, um, is the most privileged user on the system. They have access to every file and every command. So the root has the most privilege on the system, and it's generally insecure practice to just be logged in as root doing your day-to-day functions because it can be very dangerous and volatile. So instead of logging in as root, you can use this sudo command, which you can run when you're not root, and it will run the subsequent command as root. So for example, I might want to remove a file on my operating system, and I'm logged in as a normal user, but and I want to remove the file. Two options I can have if the file, if I don't have permission to remove it as my current user, I can use the sudo command, which will delete the file as root, or I can use the su command. Uh, the su command will switch you into the root user, and then you'll be in the root user, and every command you type after that will be as root. But it's generally recommended to just use the sudo command so that you don't break anything. And as I mentioned earlier, the sudo file determines what users can use the sudo command, because you don't want every user to just be running around running commands as root. That could be very destructive. So the sudo file determines which users on the system or which groups are capable of using the sudo command and running commands as root. And so this is the default configuration for the sudo file. As you can see here, each of these lines depicts like a user or group that has access. The sudoers file is located in etc sudoers, and there's also the etc sudoers.d directory. So keep in mind, oh, what exactly is a root user? Uh, I mentioned it a bit earlier, but a root user is the most privileged user on the system. So it is a specific user. It's an actual user, and they have access to every single file and command. So yeah, and there's only one of them on the system. Yeah, super user is the other way to refer to them. So this sudoers file, which determines who can use the sudo command to run commands as a super user, is located in etc sudoers. This is the actual file that you'll be editing. And there is also a directory called etc sudoers.d. And inside this directory, there may be more configuration files, which will further alter the list of sudoers. And the way to edit the sudoers file, you don't want to just run a text editor on this etc sudoers file. What you want to do is use the sudo vi sudo command, and it'll just open up a text editor on your machine to update this sudoers file. And you don't want to just edit the sudoers file by itself using like Vim or Nano or Gedit, because that can be dangerous, and there's more commands, or there's more configuration you have to do if you want to do that. So it's generally just recommended to edit the sudoers file using sudo vis sudo. I'm just going to bold this so you know how to exactly what I'm talking about. Okay, and the format of the sudoers file, I'll make this very quick because it's also not that important. Um, this first field, uh, you can ignore the configuration up here. You can just ignore that. You don't really need to understand that. This first field refers to what user or group the line applies to. So here it's root. Down here it's %admin, %sudo, which means the admin groups. So you use the percent to denote a group instead of a user. And then this first all, there's a bunch of alls here. The first one means all on all hosts. The second one means you can run the command as all users. Sorry. And the third all means run the command as all groups. The fourth all means you can run every command. Um, Again, you really won't need to understand this in depth. All you'll need to know for configuring the sudoers file during the competition is you'll just want it to be the default sudoers file. So it's the same thing as the etc sources.app/sources.list file. It's the same thing as that. The most secure configuration is the default configuration. So in the same way, you can find out the default configuration by making a VM and checking the etc sudoers file and copying that somewhere accessible for your team, so that during the competition you can just replace every line with the configured file. Okay. Services. So services are pretty simple. They're managed using the service command. So you can list all the services running with --status--all. You can stop services with service and then the name and then stop, and same thing for starting them. When you run the status all command, it'll give you this output of services, which you can see here. So, so you have the service name on the right column, and then on the left column you have either a plus or a minus or a question mark. And a plus means the service is running, a minus means it's stopped, and a question mark means the service status is unknown because it's not managed by this service command. So it's kind of counterintuitive, but this service command only manages a specific amount of services. Other services are managed by different commands like systemctl and stuff like that. But primarily you only need to know about the service command. Okay. Okay, now cron. So cron refers to scheduled tasks. Scheduled tasks are just commands that are ran um, at a time interval. So for example, you might want to schedule a task to do something like restart a web server every 2 days. That's an example of a scheduled task. So it runs without any supervision by the actual user. The cron service is it's a service that you could see here. So back on this list of services that are running by default, if you look closely, there's the cron service here. And what the cron service does is it runs all cron jobs found in, it just runs all cron jobs. And what is a cron job? A cron job is an actual job. So it just refers to the actual task that is being ran and that is being scheduled. And cron is the service that runs them. And where the cron jobs found, the cron jobs are found in these directories: var spool cron, etc cron.d, and etc cron. That's where cron jobs are found. And how do you edit crons? You edit them with the cron tab command. So you can edit the current cron tabs or the current cron jobs with cron tab -e, E for edit, and you can list them with cron tab -l for list. And to each of these commands, you can append the -u and add a user. So for example, I could do user root, and that would list all the cron tabs for the user root. Keep in mind though, if you want to list the cron tabs or edit the cron tabs for a user that isn't yourself, then you'll need to um, either use the sudo command or you'll need to provide the password. Yes. So here's some more detail about what a cron job is. Uh, Um, so this is the format of a cron job file or an actual cron job. So you'll see this format within the actual file. There's 5 asterisks and then there's the actual command. The asterisk, the asterisk is replaced with a number, and the number will be whatever follows this format. So this first field, this first asterisk will be replaced with a minute. The second one is the hour. Third is the day of the month. Fourth is the day, and fifth is the, or no, fourth is the month. Fifth is the day of the week. So it denotes like every blank of how often you want to run it. You can also choose to omit the number and just leave the asterisk as it is, and then it'll just run it every blank. So for example, this cron job here isn't an actual cron job, but if it were, and if it were just 5 asterisks, that would mean run it every single minute, because you don't specify a minute, you don't specify an hour, you don't specify a day or a month or a week. So it just runs every single minute. You can omit specific things to have it run every hour, for example, if you put an asterisk here, or every month if you put an asterisk here, and that's basically how it works. And the relevance to the actual competition is that uh, oftentimes you'll have backdoors. We'll go into backdoors in a future meeting, but backdoors are essentially malicious programs that are being run on your computer. And even if you remove the backdoor, sometimes what will happen is they get regenerated and they start running again, and you'll be confused and you'll be like, what the heck? Why is this backdoor here? I just deleted it. In that case, it might be a cron job in which the backdoor is being ran over and over again in this cron tab file. Okay, and now I'm gonna quickly try to show you guys what exactly the file looks like. Speed, 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 speed. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, you have the cron tab command. The 2 commands that are pertinent is -e and -l. You don't use them exclusively. So I'll just use -e or -l right now to list all the cron tabs that I have currently. Um, okay, all these. So this just listed the entire cron tabs file, which is etc cron tab something something. So this listed an entire cron tabs file. All these hashtags, these are just comments, so you can ignore all of these. The actual cron tab will be at the very end of the file. And as you can see, it's right here. So I have a current cron tab running right now. So if you recall what I mentioned earlier, you have the 5 fields here, and then you have the command at the end. So if I go through this one by one, let me zoom in for you guys. If I go through this one by one, you have 40, which corresponds to the minute, 12, which corresponds to the hour, and then this is day of the month, and then this is days of the week. Another thing I forgot to mention is that you can specify several fields or a range of fields using a dash in between them. So this gets every day of the week between 2 and 5. And 2 represents Tuesday and 5 represents Friday. So Tuesday through Friday, this command will run. at minute 40 and hour 12. So 12:40 p.m. This command will run every Tuesday through Friday. And you can see this, the month and or the day of the month and the month are omitted, so it doesn't matter what month or day it is. It just matters what day of the week and what time it is. And the command that's being run, you can see here, is echo eat lunch and then save the output to this file in my home directory. I've had this cron tab running for a while, so I'll just show you guys what this file looks like. Oh, well, I had it at a different thing earlier, but I changed this to eat lunch. So today this command went off and it said eat lunch to me at 12:40. You'll just have to take my word for that. But yeah, so that's how a cron tab works. Okay, really quickly, I want to go over the practice that I have. I'm just going to give you guys the answers because there's really no time to like, okay. Well, if you had the answers, just like, I don't know, say it in the chat or or turn off your mic. So there's 3 questions here. The first one, configure the firewall to allow incoming SSH connections. Are you allowed to compete for any of the 4 hours between the dates? What do you mean by that? Oh yeah, yeah, you can. You can compete at any time during the competition window, which is between like Friday and Sunday. Yeah, you have to do it simultaneously though. Okay, so let's go over this first problem. Configure the firewall to allow incoming SSH connections. The second one is stop the service Apache 2. The third one, this is a cron tab, and I intended to have you guys like tell me what the cron tab is. There's like no time left though, so I'll just go over these one by one. So the first one, configure the firewall to allow incoming SSH connections. If you recall, SSH is on port 22. So you can either use UFW or IP tables for this. Very simple way is UFW allow 22. That just allows incoming connections on port 22, which is SSH. Then there's the IP tables version, which is you append a rule to the input chain because you're allowing incoming SSH connections, so it's on the input chain. On the protocol TCP, this is just something you need to memorize about each port. So SSH is on protocol TCP. And then the actual port number, which is 22. And then what do you do with it? You accept the connection. So that's how you do it using IP tables. The next question, stop the service Apache 2. This one is really easy. Service Apache 2 stop. Oh, the third one is, this is the cron tab. It runs at 0 minutes, 0 hours, which is just midnight, on the 31st of October and it doesn't matter what day of the week it is. And it echoes spooky time to this out.txt. And as you might imagine, all that does is it prints spooky time on Halloween. And that is a cron tab again. Yes, okay, so those are all the answers. I went 1 minute over and I was talking super fast. Also, this lecture is recorded and will be on the it will be on the website activities.tjhsc.edu/cyberpatriot. You can also get the website on the Facebook group. So if I went too fast, which I kind of did, and I apologize for that, please, I encourage you guys to like go look over the lecture afterwards when it's uploaded on YouTube, because there's a lot of important information that I just went over. Yeah, that's it. Thank you guys.